Maya Thompson was not someone who liked to make a fuss. She was a woman of purpose, always moving forward with grace and determination. Her life had been built on hard work, discipline, and an unshakable belief in fairness. A successful corporate attorney with years of experience under her belt, Maya had earned her place at the table through sheer grit. But even someone as composed as Maya could only take so much before reaching their breaking point. It all started on what seemed like a perfectly ordinary day. Maya had just wrapped up a demanding week at work. Meetings, court appearances, late night, briefings. She'd done it all without complaint. Now she was looking forward to a much-needed break. Her destination? A weekend getaway to visit family. The airline ticket had been booked weeks in advance, and Maya had splurged on a first-class seat. After months of non-stop hustle, she felt she deserved a little luxury, a chance to relax, stretch out, and enjoy the flight without the cramped discomfort of economy class. When the morning of her trip arrived, Maya woke up early, packed her carry-on bag neatly, and headed to the airport with plenty of time to spare. Everything about the day seemed normal, at least at first. The sun was shining, the skies were clear, and the terminal buzzed with the usual pre-flight energy. Passengers milled around, some sipping coffee, others scrolling through their phones, while announcements echoed over the intercom. For Maya, it was just another part of the routine she knew so well. But things took a turn when she approached the gate counter to check in for her flight. Clutching her boarding pass and ID, Maya greeted the agent with a polite smile. "Good morning," she said warmly. The agent barely glanced up, scanning her documents with disinterest. Then came the words that would change everything. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but your reservation seems to have an issue." Maya frowned, confused. "What kind of issue?" she asked, keeping her tone calm. The agent hesitated, then replied, "Your first-class ticket, it doesn't appear to be valid. You'll need to move to economy." For a moment, Maya thought she must have misunderstood. She pulled out her confirmation email, showing the agent the details clearly stating her booking for first class. "See here," she said, pointing to the screen. "This is my reservation, it's right there." The agent shrugged, barely glancing at the phone. "There's been an error," they repeated flatly. "We can't honor this ticket." Now Maya's confusion turned to frustration. She wasn't one to raise her voice or cause a scene, but something about this situation didn't sit right. She asked to speak to a supervisor, hoping for clarity. When the supervisor arrived, he offered no apology, only more vague explanations about technical glitches and unavoidable errors. No matter how many times Maya presented her proof, they refused to budge. By now, a small crowd had gathered nearby. Other passengers waiting to board began watching the exchange curiously. Some whispered among themselves, casting sideways glances at Maya. One older man shook his head in disbelief, muttering, "This shouldn't happen." A young mother holding her child's hand looked sympathetic but said nothing. Even the flight attendants standing nearby seemed uneasy, though none stepped in to help. For Maya, the humiliation cut deep. This wasn't just about being denied access to a comfortable seat. It was about being treated as if she didn't belong. Over the years, she'd faced moments like this before. Subtle slights, dismissive attitudes, assumptions based on the color of her skin. But this time felt different. This time it was blatant, public, and impossible to ignore. Still, Maya kept her composure. She knew losing her temper wouldn't solve anything. Instead, she made a mental note of every detail, the indifferent expressions, the evasive answers, the way people around her reacted, or failed to. She resolved to address the matter later, once she was off the plane and back home. For now, she simply nodded curtly, grabbed her carry-on, and walked toward the economy section. As she settled into her cramped seat near the back of the plane, Maya stared out the window, replaying the events in her mind. She thought about how often Black travelers shared stories like hers, stories of being questioned, doubted, or outright mistreated because of their race. She thought about the countless times she herself had brushed off similar incidents, telling herself it wasn't worth the fight. But today, something inside her shifted. Today, she realized silence wasn't an option anymore. By the time the plane touched down hours later, Maya already had a plan forming in her head. She wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. Whatever it took, she was determined to hold the airline accountable. And as she stepped off the plane, shoulders squared and eyes focused, she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. By the time Maya stepped off the plane, her mind was racing. The events at the gate replayed over and over in her head like a broken record. She couldn't shake the feeling that what had happened wasn't just an isolated incident. It was part of something bigger, something systemic. It wasn't the first time she'd encountered moments where her presence or identity seemed to trigger suspicion or dismissal, but this time it felt deliberate, calculated even. And Maya wasn't about to let it go unanswered. Once home, she unpacked her bag and sat down at her desk, determined to get to the bottom of things. Her laptop hummed to life as she began typing keywords into search engines. Denied first-class seat because of race. Airline discrimination complaints. Black travelers mistreated. At first, she wasn't sure what she was looking for, but within minutes she found herself scrolling through countless stories eerily similar to hers. There were articles about passengers being bumped from premium seats despite having valid tickets, forums filled with frustrated travelers sharing their experiences, and social media posts calling out airlines for unfair treatment. The more Maya read, the angrier she became. Not just for herself, but for everyone else who had been treated this way. One story stood out in particular. A young black woman had posted online about being told her first-class ticket was invalid, only to watch as the airline rebooked a white passenger into her seat moments later. Another recounted how they were repeatedly questioned about their loyalty program status, while other travelers breezed through without issue. Each account painted a picture of a pattern so consistent it couldn't be dismissed as coincidence. This wasn't carelessness, it was bias, plain and simple. Maya knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. What started as a personal grievance quickly transformed into a mission. She decided to use her skills as an attorney to fight back, not just for herself, but for every traveler who had ever felt powerless in situations like these. She grabbed a legal pad and began jotting down notes, outlining potential steps she could take. First, she would gather evidence, not just her own experience, but also testimonies from others who had faced similar treatment. Then she would draft a formal complaint against the airline, demanding accountability and change. Her next move was to reach out to colleagues at her law firm. Though she specialized in corporate litigation, Maya had built strong relationships with lawyers who focused on civil rights cases. She called up Sarah, a close friend and partner known for her work on racial justice issues. Over coffee, Maya shared everything: the interaction at the gate, the dismissive attitude of the staff, and the growing mountain of research she'd compiled. Sarah listened intently, nodding along as Maya spoke. "This is huge," Sarah said, finally leaning forward. "If we can prove this isn't an isolated case, we might have grounds for a class action lawsuit. Think about it. This could force real change across the industry." Maya's eyes lit up. A class action lawsuit? The idea hadn't occurred to her before, but now that Sarah mentioned it, it made perfect sense. If enough people came forward with similar stories, they could expose the airline's practices on a much larger scale. Together, they spent hours brainstorming strategies, discussing potential legal arguments, and mapping out a timeline for action. But Maya didn't stop there. She wanted to amplify her efforts beyond the courtroom. Inspired by the stories she'd read online, she turned to social media, creating a private group where travelers could share their experiences of discrimination. Within days, dozens of people joined, posting heartfelt messages about their encounters with airlines. Some recounted being denied upgrades, others described rude comments from staff, and a few admitted they'd stopped flying altogether because of how often they were targeted. Reading through the posts, Maya felt both heartbroken and empowered. These weren't just individual grievances. They were pieces of a puzzle that, when put together, revealed a disturbing truth. As the group grew, so did Maya's resolve. She realized she wasn't alone in this fight. People from all walks of life were eager to support her cause, offering advice, resources, and encouragement. One member suggested reaching out to civil rights organizations for backing. Another recommended connecting with journalists to bring attention to the issue. Taking their suggestions to heart, Maya drafted emails to several prominent advocacy groups, explaining her situation and asking for their help. To her surprise, they responded almost immediately, expressing interest in collaborating. One organization in particular stood out. Known for its tireless efforts to combat racial inequality, the group agreed to provide legal guidance and public relations support. They also connected Maya with experts who could analyze data patterns and identify trends in discriminatory behavior among airlines. With their assistance, Maya began piecing together a comprehensive case that went far beyond her personal experience. Despite the mounting challenges, Maya remained focused. Late nights became the norm as she pored over documents, reviewed testimonies, and strategized with her team. Her living room turned into a makeshift war room, cluttered with papers, sticky notes, and half-empty cups of tea. Friends and family noticed the change in her. She was quieter than usual, more introspective, but they understood the weight of what she was trying to accomplish. When asked if she needed help, Maya simply smiled and thanked them, knowing full well that this battle was one she had to lead herself. What kept her going was the knowledge that she was fighting for something bigger than revenge or restitution. This wasn't just about getting justice for herself. It was about forcing the airline, and perhaps the entire travel industry, to confront its biases and make meaningful changes. Every late-night research session, every phone call with a new ally, and every message of support from strangers reinforced her belief that she was on the right path. By the time she finalized her plan, Maya felt a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced in years. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Airlines were powerful entities with deep pockets and teams of lawyers ready to defend their interests. But Maya was no stranger to uphill battles. As she closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, she allowed herself a small smile. Whatever happened next, she was ready. Maya knew that if she wanted to make a real impact, she couldn't keep her story hidden. It was time to take the fight public. She had spent weeks gathering evidence, connecting with others who had faced similar discrimination, and building a solid case against the airline. But now she needed to step out of the shadows and let the world see what she had uncovered. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about exposing a system that had failed so many people. The day of the press conference arrived, and Maya felt a mix of nerves and determination. She stood backstage in a small hotel conference room, adjusting her blazer and taking deep breaths to steady herself. The room buzzed with anticipation as reporters set up cameras, microphones, and notebooks. Representatives from civil rights organizations, including the group that had been supporting her, were seated in the front row ready to show their solidarity. Maya glanced at Sarah, her friend and legal advisor, who gave her an encouraging nod. "You've got this," Sarah whispered. Those 3 words were all Maya needed to hear. When Maya walked onto the stage, the room fell silent. Dressed professionally, but simply she carried herself with quiet confidence. Behind her was a large screen displaying the logo of the advocacy group backing her cause. As she approached the podium, the flashbulbs of cameras went off like tiny fireworks, illuminating her face. For a brief moment, Maya felt overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. But then she remembered why she was there. Not for herself, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin. With that thought, she began to speak. "Good morning," she started, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Maya Thompson, and I'm here today to share my story. Not just mine, but the stories of countless Black travelers who have faced discrimination while flying." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. 2 weeks ago, I arrived at the airport excited for a much-needed trip to visit family. I had booked a first-class ticket well in advance, yet when I reached the gate, I was told there was an error with my reservation. Despite showing proof of my booking, I was denied access to the seat I paid for and forced to sit in economy instead. As she recounted the incident, Maya's tone remained measured, but her frustration was evident. She described how the gate agent dismissed her concerns. how the supervisor offered vague excuses and how other passengers watched silently as the situation unfolded. This wasn't just about seating, she emphasized. It was about being treated as though I didn't belong. It was about being questioned, doubted, and ultimately humiliated, all because of the color of my skin. The audience listened, intently, some scribbling notes, others nodding in agreement. Maya then shifted gears, explaining how she had discovered that her experience wasn't unique. She shared statistics and anecdotes from the research she'd conducted, highlighting patterns of discriminatory behavior across the airline industry. "This isn't an isolated mistake," she said firmly. "It's part of a larger problem. Too many Black travelers have been subjected to unfair treatment, whether it's being denied upgrades, questioned excessively about their tickets, or even removed from flights without cause. And it has to stop." Her words resonated deeply. By the time she finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. Reporters clamored to ask questions, their pens poised over notepads. One journalist asked how Maya planned to hold the airline accountable. Another wanted to know what specific changes she hoped to achieve. Maya answered each question thoughtfully, emphasizing that her goal wasn't revenge, it was reform. She wanted the airline to acknowledge its wrongdoing, implement policies to prevent future incidents, and provide training to address implicit bias among staff. The press conference ended, but its effects rippled far beyond the walls of that hotel room. Within hours, Maya's story dominated headlines. News outlets ran articles with titles like "Attorney Takes on Airline Over Discrimination" and "Black Travelers Demand Justice After Years of Mistreatment." Social media exploded with reactions. Hashtags like Tendre Fly with Dignity and Airline Accountability trended worldwide, sparking conversations about racial inequality in the travel industry. People from all corners of the globe chimed in, sharing their own experiences and expressing support for Maya's cause. Celebrities and influencers joined the movement, using their platforms to amplify the message. A popular actor tweeted, "If we can't fly safely and respectfully, what does that say about our society?" An Instagram influencer posted a photo of herself holding a sign that read, "Discrimination doesn't fly with me." Even everyday users weighed in, recounting times they'd witnessed or experienced racism while traveling. The flood of stories validated everything Maya had suspected. This was a systemic issue that needed urgent attention. Meanwhile, the airline scrambled to respond. At first, they released a generic statement calling the incident a misunderstanding and promising to review their procedures. But the public wasn't buying it. Comment sections under the airline's posts filled with criticism and calls for accountability. Memes mocking the company's weak apology circulated online, further damaging their reputation. Passengers began canceling flights, opting for competitors instead. Influential figures announced boycotts, vowing not to fly with the carrier until meaningful reforms were implemented. The pressure mounted quickly, forcing the airline to reconsider its stance. Behind the scenes, Maya worked tirelessly to keep the momentum going. She appeared on morning talk shows, participated in radio interviews, and wrote op-eds for major newspapers. Each appearance brought fresh attention to the issue, keeping the conversation alive. Her calm demeanor and articulate arguments won over skeptics and inspired allies. Even those who initially doubted her claims found themselves swayed by the overwhelming evidence she presented. But Maya didn't stop there. Recognizing the power of collective action, she organized virtual town halls where affected travelers could share their stories directly with decision-makers. These events drew hundreds of participants, creating a space for healing and advocacy. Maya also collaborated with lawmakers to draft legislation aimed at combating racial discrimination in the travel industry. Though the process was slow, the progress was undeniable. As the days turned into weeks, Maya noticed a shift, not just in public perception, but within herself. She had always been driven and determined, but this fight ignited something new inside her. It wasn't just about winning, it was about creating lasting change. Every interview, every social media post, every supportive message reminded her that she wasn't alone. There was strength in numbers, and together, they were making their voices heard. By the time the dust settled after the initial wave of publicity, Maya knew the battle was far from over. The airline's half-hearted apology and vague promises weren't enough. They needed to do better, and Maya was prepared to hold them to it. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had taken a stand, and the world was listening. The legal battle officially began when Maya filed her lawsuit against the airline. It was a bold move, one that sent shockwaves through both the aviation industry and the public. The complaint wasn't just about the incident at the gate. It outlined years of systemic discrimination faced by black travelers, supported by testimonies from dozens of individuals who had come forward after hearing Maya's story. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was a collective demand for justice. From the moment the case was announced, the airline dug in its heels. Their team of high-powered lawyers launched an aggressive defense strategy, attempting to discredit Maya and minimize the significance of her claims. In court filings, they argued that the seat reassignment was due to a technical glitch, not racism. They even suggested that Maya might have misunderstood the situation or exaggerated its severity. To them, this was a simple customer service error blown out of proportion by someone seeking attention. But Maya and her legal team were ready. Over weeks of preparation, they had gathered mountains of evidence to counter the airline's arguments. First, there were the internal documents, emails, memos, and training manuals that hinted at implicit biases within the company's operations. One particularly damning memo instructed staff to verify loyalty status more rigorously for certain groups of passengers, using language vague enough to mask discriminatory intent, but clear enough to raise suspicions. Then there were the testimonies from other travelers, each recounting their own experiences of being treated unfairly because of their race. Together, these pieces formed a compelling narrative that painted the airline's practices as part of a broader pattern of inequity. As the discovery phase of the trial unfolded, tensions escalated on both sides. Depositions became heated exchanges, with airline executives squirming under cross-examination. When asked why they hadn't addressed previous complaints of discrimination, one senior manager stumbled over his words, claiming he wasn't aware of any widespread issues. Another witness admitted that the airline rarely conducted follow-ups with passengers who reported bias, leaving many cases unresolved. Public pressure continued to mount outside the courtroom. Social media remained ablaze with hashtags like #FlyWithDignity and Your Airline Accountability, keeping the spotlight firmly on the case. Influencers and activists amplified the message, urging people to boycott the airline until real change occurred. Some celebrities went so far as to cancel partnerships and endorsements with the carrier, dealing yet another blow to its already tarnished reputation. Meanwhile, investigative journalists uncovered additional stories of mistreatment, further fueling outrage. A major news outlet published an exposé detailing how the airline had mishandled similar incidents in the past, including instances where employees admitted to racial profiling during security checks. Despite the mounting evidence, the airline clung to its denial. During one pivotal hearing, their lead attorney tried to dismiss the testimonies of affected passengers, calling them anecdotal and unsubstantiated. He argued that isolated incidents didn't prove systemic discrimination, but Maya's team anticipated this tactic. They presented expert testimony from sociologists and psychologists specializing in institutional bias, explaining how seemingly minor actions could reflect larger patterns of prejudice. These experts broke down complex concepts into relatable terms, helping the judge and the public understand the insidious nature of systemic racism. One of the most powerful moments came when Maya herself took the stand. Dressed in a crisp navy suit, she spoke calmly and confidently, recounting every detail of her experience at the gate. Her voice carried weight as she described the humiliation of being questioned in front of other passengers, the frustration of seeing her proof ignored, and the realization that she was being treated differently because of her race. She didn't shout or cry. Instead, she let the facts speak for themselves, delivering her testimony with quiet authority. When the opposing counsel attempted to undermine her credibility, asking whether she had ever misread a reservation confirmation or misunderstood A policy, Maya remained unfazed. I am an attorney, she replied evenly. My job is to analyze details and interpret rules. If I say there was no error with my booking, you can trust that I know what I'm talking about. The courtroom erupted in murmurs of approval, and even the judge seemed impressed by her composure. As the trial progressed, cracks began to show in the airline's defense. Leaked emails revealed internal discussions about how to handle negative publicity without addressing underlying problems. One executive joked about offering free snacks as a PR stunt to distract from criticism. Another suggested blaming outdated software rather than acknowledging human bias. These revelations infuriated the public and strengthened Maya's case. People saw the airline's behavior for what it was, a desperate attempt to avoid accountability. The tipping point came when Maya's team filed a motion to subpoena the airline's employee training materials. What they uncovered shocked everyone. The documents included outdated protocols riddled with coded language that perpetuated stereotypes about minority travelers. For example, one section advised gate agents to be cautious with passengers who appeared visibly agitated, citing examples that disproportionately targeted people of color. Another recommended flagging frequent flyers whose profiles showed unusual spending patterns, a criterion that critics argued unfairly singled out immigrants and low-income travelers. When excerpts of these materials leaked to the press, the backlash was immediate and overwhelming. Headlines blared phrases like, "Airline training manuals promote bias," and "Systemic racism exposed in shocking documents." Public figures condemned the airline, calling for swift action. Even some of the company's own employees spoke out, admitting they had felt uncomfortable following certain guidelines but feared retaliation if they questioned them. By now, the airline's stock price had plummeted, and its leadership was in disarray. Board meetings turned into shouting matches as executives argued over how to salvage the brand. Desperate to contain the damage, the CEO personally reached out to Maya to negotiate a settlement. At first, they offered a substantial sum of money, hoping to buy her silence. But Maya refused. Money wasn't the point, accountability was. She demanded sweeping changes, mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, transparent reporting mechanisms for discriminatory practices, and a formal, public apology acknowledging the harm caused. Reluctantly, the airline agreed to her terms. It was a humiliating defeat for a company that had once prided itself on excellence. Yet for Maya, it was only the beginning. She knew the road ahead would be long, and true change wouldn't happen overnight. But she also knew she had struck a blow against a system designed to marginalize people like her. As she left the courthouse that day, surrounded by supporters and reporters, she allowed herself a small smile. Justice, though imperfect, was finally within reach. With the settlement negotiations underway, Maya found herself in a position of immense power. The airline, once dismissive and defensive, was now scrambling to save face. Their CEO had personally reached out to her, offering not just financial compensation but also promises of reform. But Maya wasn't interested in half measures or hollow gestures. She knew this was her chance to push for real, lasting change, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly by the airline or others like it. The first round of talks took place in a sleek corporate conference room at the airline's headquarters. Maya walked in flanked by Sarah, her trusted legal advisor, and representatives from the civil rights organizations that had supported her cause. Across the table sat the airline's top executives, their polished suits and practiced smiles masking the anxiety simmering beneath the surface. They began with pleasantries, awkward small talk about the weather and travel trends, but Maya cut straight to the point. "This isn't about money," she said firmly, leaning forward. "It's about accountability. You've had years to address these issues and you've chosen to ignore them. Now we're giving you the opportunity to do better." Her words hung heavy in the air. One of the executives cleared his throat and nodded. "We understand your concerns, Ms. Thompson," he replied, "and we're committed to making things right. We'd like to offer you a substantial settlement as a gesture of goodwill." Maya raised an eyebrow. "A settlement won't fix the problem," she countered. "What I want is action. Real, tangible steps to ensure this doesn't happen again, not just to me, but to anyone else. She then laid out her demands. Mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, from gate agents to executives. Transparent reporting mechanisms where passengers could file complaints without fear of retaliation. Regular audits conducted by independent third parties to assess compliance. And a formal public apology acknowledging the harm caused by the airline's discriminatory practices. Each demand was backed by evidence, the leaked training manuals, the testimonies from affected travelers, the expert analyses, and Maya made sure the executives understood there was no room for negotiation. At first, the airline pushed back. They argued that implementing such sweeping changes would be costly and time-consuming. "These are major operational shifts," one executive protested. "They'll disrupt our workflow and impact profitability." Maya didn't blink. "Profitability shouldn't come at the expense of human dignity," she shot back. "If your systems are designed to treat people unequally, then they need to be dismantled and rebuilt. That's not optional. It's necessary." Her unwavering stance put the airline on the defensive. Faced with mounting public pressure and dwindling customer loyalty, they had little choice but to concede. Reluctantly, they agreed to adopt all of Maya's proposed reforms. It was a historic victory, one that set a precedent for how corporations must address systemic racism. For the first time, an airline was being forced to confront its biases, head-on, under the watchful eyes of advocates and the public. But Maya wasn't done yet. She insisted that the airline issue a public apology, not buried in fine print or tucked away on a seldom-visited web page, but front and center, broadcasted, widely enough to reach millions. She worked closely with the company's PR team to craft a statement that was both sincere and specific. When the apology finally aired during primetime television, it sent shockwaves through the industry. To our valued customers, particularly those within the Black community whom we have failed, I am deeply sorry, the CEO said in the televised address. We recognize that our actions, or lack thereof, have perpetuated discrimination and inequality. This is unacceptable, and we are committed to doing better. Starting today, we will implement comprehensive reforms to ensure that every traveler is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. The apology struck a chord. Viewers praised its honesty, while critics noted it was long overdue. Social media lit up with reactions. Some expressed cautious optimism, hopeful that the airline's promises would translate into meaningful action. Others remained skeptical, vowing to hold the company accountable if it failed to follow through. Either way, the message was clear. The world was watching. In the weeks that followed, Maya became a symbol of resilience and empowerment. Invitations poured in from conferences, universities, and community organizations eager to hear her speak. She traveled across the country, sharing her story and urging others to stand up against injustice. Her speeches were powerful, blending personal anecdotes with calls to action. "Change doesn't happen because we hope for it," she often said. "It happens because we demand it." Her efforts inspired legislation aimed at combating racial discrimination in the travel industry. Lawmakers introduced bills requiring airlines to conduct regular bias audits and provide detailed reports on passenger complaints. Celebrities and influencers continued to amplify the movement, using their platforms to keep the conversation alive. Even rival airlines began reviewing their own policies, fearful of facing similar scrutiny. Meanwhile, the airline itself embarked on a rocky path toward redemption. Under Maya's watchful eye, they rolled out new training programs designed to educate employees about implicit bias and cultural sensitivity. Flyers noticed subtle changes, too. Staff members seemed more attentive, procedures felt less invasive, and interactions carried a newfound warmth. While progress was slow, the shift marked a turning point, not just for the company but for an entire sector long plagued by inequity. For Maya, the journey was far from over. Though she had achieved a monumental victory, she knew the fight against systemic racism was ongoing. Discrimination didn't end with one lawsuit or one apology. It required constant vigilance and collective effort. Still, she allowed herself moments of quiet pride. As she boarded another flight months later, this time greeted warmly by attentive staff, she couldn't help but smile. She had turned the tables, forcing the airline to beg for mercy, and won. Maya's victory wasn't just a personal triumph, it was the beginning of something much bigger. As word spread about her successful fight against the airline, she became a beacon of hope for those who had long felt powerless in the face of discrimination. People from all walks of life reached out to thank her, sharing their own stories and asking for advice on how to stand up for themselves. Maya realized that her journey wasn't just about holding one company accountable, it was about inspiring others to demand fairness and respect wherever they encountered injustice. In the months following the settlement, Maya dedicated herself to amplifying the voices of marginalized communities. She founded an advocacy group called Fly with Dignity, aimed at addressing racial bias in the travel industry. The organization provided resources for travelers to report discriminatory incidents, connected victims with legal support, and partnered with airlines to implement better policies. It also served as a platform for storytelling, where people could share their experiences without fear of judgment or retaliation. Through Fly with Dignity, Maya hoped to create a world where no one would ever feel humiliated simply because of who they were. Her work quickly gained traction. Media outlets covered the launch of Fly with Dignity extensively, praising Maya's vision and determination. Influencers and activists joined forces with her, using their platforms to promote the cause. One viral campaign encouraged travelers to post photos of themselves holding signs that read, "I deserve respect when I fly." Thousands participated, flooding social media with messages of solidarity and empowerment. Even lawmakers took notice, introducing legislation inspired by Maya's efforts to ensure equitable treatment for all passengers. As her influence grew, so did invitations to speak at high-profile events. Universities invited her to deliver commencement addresses. Corporations sought her guidance on diversity initiatives, and civil rights organizations honored her with awards. At each appearance, Maya used her platform not just to recount her story but to challenge audiences to think critically about systemic inequality. She often began her speeches by saying, "Discrimination isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's subtle. A glance, a tone, a refusal to listen. But its impact is profound, and we must confront it wherever it exists." Her message resonated deeply, especially among young people. Students wrote essays about her courage. Artists created murals celebrating her resilience, and aspiring lawyers cited her case as inspiration for pursuing careers in civil rights law. Maya found joy in mentoring these individuals, offering advice and encouragement whenever she could. She reminded them that change rarely happens overnight, but assured them that persistence pays off. "Progress is messy," she told a group of college students during one particularly moving talk. "But every step forward matters. Don't be afraid to take yours." Back at the airline, the reforms Maya had fought for slowly began to take root. Mandatory anti-bias training sessions became a cornerstone of employee development programs. Managers learned how to recognize and address discriminatory behavior, while frontline staff practiced new protocols designed to foster inclusivity. Flyers noticed the difference almost immediately. Gate agents greeted passengers warmly, regardless of their race or background. Flight attendants went out of their way to make everyone feel welcome. Even complaints about mistreatment dropped significantly, a testament to the effectiveness of the changes. To ensure accountability, the airline brought in independent auditors to evaluate their progress annually. These audits weren't just internal exercises. They were shared publicly, allowing customers to see exactly what the company was doing to combat bias. Transparency bred trust, and over time, the airline regained some of the goodwill it had. Passengers who had sworn never to fly with them again cautiously returned, encouraged by visible improvements. Celebrities who had boycotted the carrier even announced partnerships, signaling their approval of the turnaround. Despite the progress, Maya remained vigilant. She understood that systemic racism couldn't be eradicated overnight. It required constant effort and vigilance. Every year she reviewed the airline's audit reports, pointing out areas where further improvement was needed. When passengers reported new incidents of discrimination, she worked directly with the company to investigate and resolve them promptly. Her involvement ensured that the airline didn't slip back into old habits. Beyond her work with Fly With Dignity in the airline, Maya continued to break barriers in her own career. Her success in the lawsuit earned her recognition as one of the top attorneys in her field, opening doors to opportunities she had never imagined. Law firms across the country sought her expertise, and prestigious organizations invited her to serve on their boards. Yet Maya stayed grounded, always prioritizing her mission over personal accolades. For her, the true measure of success wasn't fame or fortune. It was the lives she touched along the way. One of her proudest moments came when she received a letter from a young black girl named Ava. In neat handwriting, Ava wrote, "Dear Ms. Thompson, thank you for standing up for people like me. Because of you, I know I can do anything I set my mind to. One day I want to be a lawyer just like you." Maya framed the letter and placed it on her office wall, a reminder of why she kept fighting, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Years later, looking back on everything she had accomplished, Maya felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had started this journey seeking justice for herself, but she ended up transforming an entire industry. The airline she once battled had become a model for inclusive practices, proving that meaningful change was possible. And through Fly With Dignity, she had empowered countless individuals to advocate for themselves and others. On a quiet evening, sitting in her favorite armchair with a cup of tea, Maya reflected on how far she had come. She thought about the little girl at the gate who had been denied a seat, not just in first class but in dignity, and smiled. That girl had grown into a woman who refused to stay silent, who turned her pain into purpose, and who showed the world what it meant to fight for fairness. For Maya, the journey hadn't ended. It had only evolved. There were still battles to be fought, injustices to be addressed, and hearts to be changed. But as she closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep, she knew one thing for certain. She had made a difference, and that was enough.